One thing we've got to look at when we look at the world and we look at the kind of, I guess, the state of health that we're in, the number one cause of death now on the planet, which didn't even used to factor in the top 20 or 30, is cardiovascular disease. And the number one driver of that, of course, is high blood pressure. Now, high blood pressure, the pre-cause of all heart disease and cardiovascular disease deaths, it's about 1.1 billion cases on the planet, and it kills about 18 million people a year. So it's the number one cause of death, and it's preventable. So when we talk about communicable and non-communicable diseases, the number one cause of death for human beings is preventable. I've worked with people and helped them reverse and treat their high blood pressure and get rid of their high blood pressure. It's very easy to do if you're willing to change to a plant-based whole food diet and a regular intelligent fasting. Very easy to do if you're willing. But there will be changes to the diet and behavior around that. But if you wanted to do that, you can actually take away your risk of the number one cause of death for humans. What causes it? It's the number one cause of heart disease, stroke, heart failure, kidney disease. What causes it? We know what causes it is too much meat in the diet, too much processed food, salt, coffee, alcohol, constipation, stress, a lack of sleep, all those things that a lot of us are suffering from right now. So these are all things that we behave ourselves into. And one of my favorite sayings is that you cannot eat yourself sick and drug yourself well. If you've eaten yourself sick, you've got to eat yourself well. So let's have a look at genetics. And one of my favorite quotes about genetics, amazing quote because it really sums it up well, is from Harvard cancer specialist Dr. Michelle Holmes. And she says, quote, "Genes have been for thousands of years, but if cancer rates are changing in a lifetime, that doesn't have much to do with genes." So it's interesting when you look at genetics because genetics come from the word genome, which means to produce. Now, to produce means you're in charge of it. It doesn't mean you are the victim of it, doesn't it? It means you're in charge. And genetics is exactly that. It's up to you to express your genes how you want to. Genes haven't changed. Our basic genetic structure and DNA haven't changed for 40,000 years, 200,000 years by some estimates. And if you take me, little Jason Shon Bennett, born in 1967, 23,688 genes, born very sick, unwell, ended up on the typical diet with medication and ate all the typical Kiwi food, the meat and 3 veg and did the usual. I got to age 20. I was still the same Jason Shon Bennett, the same 23,688 genes. They were expressing a certain way. I was still sick. Notice how when I was 20, between the age of 20 and 25, I changed my diet, my lifestyle, and my environment. And that transformed my genetic expression. And that's where you have the power, is to change your genetic expression. You can't change your genetics, but you can change how they express themselves. And that's the key. And that's what I did. So then I got to 30. I hadn't been sick for 5 years. I got to 40. I got to 50. Now I'm 52. I haven't been sick for 27 years. No bugs, colds, flus, viruses, nothing. Asthma, hay fever. And I live right here in Auckland. So I'm a good example of how it's not about your genetics. It's about your genetic expression. It's about what you do with your genetics. So the interesting thing about your genetics, there's so much we could talk about with genetics, but 2 examples of the migration studies, what I call the migration studies, and there's so much research on this now. You can go to jasonshonbennett.com, have a look at all the research on genetics. But you look at my 2 favorites, and one of them is African Americans. Dr. Dennis Burkitt's a British surgeon. He went to Africa, he looked at Africans for 20 years. He didn't find a single case of bowel cancer or diverticulitis or IBS, IBD, any of the bowel diseases we have. Not one case. And then he went back home to Britain and wrote a book about it. But then you look every year at the cases of bowel cancer rates in America, and you'll find that the bowel cancer rates in America, the number one rates of bowel cancer are in African Americans. Massive, massive off the scale. So African Americans in Africa got the number one bowel cancer rates, but Africans back in Africa, no discernible bowel cancer rates at all. So you notice that when they get on a plane and go to America from Africa, the bowel cancer rates go through the roof. Now, is that because their genes have changed? No. It's because their genetic expression has changed because of the diet, the lifestyle, and the environment. Same thing happened after the Second World War. Japanese moved from Japan to Hawaii, became Japanese Americans. And what they found was after 15 years or so, they were growing the same bowel cancer and heart disease and obesity, type 2 diabetes that Americans were, but their siblings back in Japan weren't. So what happened was when you put your genetics in a new environment, you feed it a different diet, it will change its expression. And there's 170 genes in your genes, there's 170 genes. And when you eat less and eat well, they trigger. And those genes are responsible for 4 things. So DNA repair, metabolism, energy production, and cell survival. So if we look at those 4, DNA repair is your anti-cancer mechanism. Metabolism is how big you get. Energy production is your energy. And cell survival is how long you live. So how long you live, the size you get, whether you get cancer or not, and how much energy you've got along the way, is all dictated to by what you eat and how much you eat, and that's how it plays off against the genes in the gut. So it's a fascinating dance when you really look at it, and I'm fascinated by genes and genetics. And when we look at the studies around genetics, we noticed that there was a great research piece done where they took a whole lot of men and who were overweight with high cholesterol, blood pressure and things, and they taught them how to do three things. I mean, there's three simple things they taught these guys how to do. They said, look, we want to measure your genetics and see what happens if you just eat more plants, go for a walk every day and relax. So essentially mindfulness and meditation, changing your diet, changing your exercise. Those three things is all they did. Now, what happened to those men? After 12 weeks of doing that, they lowered their blood pressure, they had body weight lowering, 450 though, here's the key, 450 disease-promoting genes that turn on and are involved with the switching on of prostate and breast cancer turned off. 450 genes turned off. 48 disease-preventing genes turned on. So you had a whole lot of preventing genes turn on and a whole lot of genes that turn disease on turned off within 12 weeks by just eating plants, going for a walk and meditating. So the really key thing is, diet and lifestyle overrides genetics. And the key thing to remember here is that genes require triggers. You control the triggers. If you look at it like a gun, your gun's loaded, your genetics are loaded, but it's up to you as to what bullet you load and how you pull the trigger. So it's completely up to you how your genes express themselves. So most modern cancer is not genetic when we actually look at it. Great study here on your screen, Dr. Raju Kupchalati, Harvard Medical School Professor of Genetics, from the Worldwide Cancer Genome Atlas Project, studying the genetic aspects of 25 major cancers, said, and I quote, most cancers are the result of genetic changes that occur during the lifetime of an individual. This does not affect future generations. So we know the majority of epigenetic changes to human beings is from diet, lifestyle, and environmental choices.